My name is Bill Lake. I first came to Hong Kong over 52 years ago. I came here originally in the British Army. I was with the artillery, Royal Artillery, and we came out here. Our normal posting was for 2.5 years, but I managed to stay with one regiment, and then I got posted to the following regiment. So I had 2 serious postings in Hong Kong with the artillery, enjoyed every minute of it. And then when I left Hong Kong, the military in Hong Kong, I did a number of private jobs. I was in private security. Believe it or not, I was an actor for quite a long time. And I learned all about these things that had happened during the war, and that just triggered something in me. And it wasn't until the handover in 1997 that I really started getting into the history and the research of what happened, during the Japanese occupation, and heard some wonderful stories. One of my favorite stories was, of course, Uncle John. He was the Japanese interpreter, and he could speak English because he read the Bible. He was a Presbyterian minister, and through that, the Japanese government forced him to work with the army as a translator, interpreter. But he wouldn't beat up the prisoners like the others did. He would rather help them out. If they were sick, he would try and get them medicine. And I mean, this was all at huge risk to his own life. The Japanese person in charge of the camps, Tokunaga, he knew that he was up to tricks. He knew he was trying to help the British and the Allied forces, but he couldn't prove it. And at one time he actually threatened Uncle John, Kiyoshi Watanabe, that he would take his head off as soon as he knew, as soon as he had proof, then that's what would happen. But Uncle John, he still continued to help the British. And at the end of the war, a lot of people don't realize this, his wife and daughters were vaporized by the bomb going off in Hiroshima. And after the war, they actually interviewed him on This Is Your Life, the BBC program, This Is Your Life. And a lot of people had so much respect for that guy. Another story that was interesting was all the escapes in Hong Kong. And one of the major escapes was by Colonel Sir Lindsay Ride. He was in charge of the medical section of the Hong Kong Volunteers group, and he had decided that rather than stay in the prison and slowly have his strength wasting away from him, he decided he was going to escape and see what he could do to help the others. And he managed to escape on January the 9th. Him, his Chinese guy, Li Yipoi, and 2 members of the Royal Navy. And with the help of the East River guerrillas, who I didn't know anything about then, they helped them to escape all the way up to Chongqing. Now in Chongqing, or Chongqing as it was called then, he requested India, because Hong Kong came under India militarily during the war. And he explained he wanted to set up something that would help escaping pilots, prisoners, soldiers, and to help them escape and continue to fight the battle against the Japanese. And he was told to set up the British Army 8 group, which was mainly medical based, because he was in charge of the medical section. He had doctors under him and all sorts of wonderful people. And for a number of months they did this, just solely helping people escape, going into the villages to help the villages there with medical needs and people getting injured by Japanese bombs or machine gunning, and just normal sickness, and they would take care of it. But as the war progressed, the BAAG, British Army Aid Group, they moved more into collection of information, and from there they would pass it on to the East River guerrillas. Sometimes they would work together with the East River, and quite often they would pass their information back to the Flying Tigers, which were based, the group nearest to Hong Kong. They were based at Kwai Lin, and I had the privilege of going up there and seeing the airstrip, and actually seeing the rollers that they used to build the airstrip. It was really amazing. There's so many stories involved with the battle for Hong Kong. And of course we can't forget about the one-legged admiral, Chan Chak. He actually was Chiang Kai-shek's right-hand man, and he was sent to Hong Kong to help take care of the fifth columns and to take care of quite a lot, because there was a triad issue too. There was talk of the Night of the Long Knives, where all the triads had been paid by the Japanese to kill all the white women and children in Hong Kong. All the white men would have been in the hills preparing to fight the Japanese. And the Japanese thought that if they had killed all their wives and their children, then they would have nothing to fight for. Well, Shafdane heard about this. He was in charge of the detectives in Hong Kong, and he needed help. Chan Chak was very good with the triads. He had connections almost everywhere, and he was able to bring all the triads together, and they held this meeting. And between Shafdane and Chan Chak, they forced the triads, and they had to pay the triads quite a large sum of money to not kill the women and children. And that even boiled down to the triads. Each different triad would have a certain number of air raid tunnels, for example. And when the Japanese planes come over, or the American planes come over when they were trying to bomb the Japanese, when the people wanted to use these air raid tunnels, they would have to pay to get into it. Now, you know, just a few cents. But when you realize how many people were trying to get into these air raid tunnels, it was an extra payday for the triads. Prior to the war, the British people in Hong Kong never actually believed that Japan would have the cheek to attack a British colony. The British military, on the other hand, they were beginning to realize something bad could happen if they didn't. They ended up building the gin drinkers line because of the possibility of a Japanese attack. But overall, I don't think the British ever thought Japan would ever attack Hong Kong. You know, Hong Kong's a British colony. Why would they? How would they? And of course, most of Hong Kong's big guns were all faced out to sea because they thought if Japan did attack, they would come by the sea. That's the easiest way. Oh no, Japan came overland, didn't they? But the troops were basically told, the Japanese, they're only short, they wear glasses, they're buck teeth, they can't fight at night time because their eyesight's not very good. This is all the kind of things that the troops were told. But then, of course, when Japan actually did attack Hong Kong, these were tried and tested troops that have been in China, fighting in China for a number of years. And of course, once they had taken Hong Kong, they brought in more people, like third-grade soldiers, third-grade military, and Korean and Taiwan people to control Hong Kong. And the actual troops that took Hong Kong were then sent to other theatres of war, and most of them died there. Well, one of the books I would recommend would be The Fall of, actually I've got one here, The Fall of Hong Kong by Tim Carew. I've read it. It's quite a short book. It is more a point of view book rather than an academic book and it's, I couldn't put it down. I actually have the paperback, but it's a wonderful book. It covers a lot of space in a short period of time. Like I say, I couldn't put it down. The second book I would suggest is authored by Dr. Kong Chi Man, Professor Kong Chi Man, and his friend Choi Yao Lun, Rusty Choi. It covers a lot. It's called Eastern Fortress, and it covers every aspect: naval, the escapes. It just covers everything, even down to General Maltby's being taken off and imprisoned up in China, and his release obviously afterwards. A very good book. And the third book, well, or should I say fourth, this one. And this one is about Uncle John, the friendly Japanese interpreter. He saved quite a lot of lives. Well, General Maltby, he was a relative newcomer to Hong Kong. What a lot of people don't realize is that he only came to Hong Kong in about September of 1941. Now, we all know that Churchill had said Hong Kong is not going to be reinforced, not the slightest chance, as Tony Bannon would say. But General Grasset, who was retiring, who actually was Canadian, by the way, he had decided that Hong Kong was worth defending and having more troops here. So prior to his retirement, he went back to the UK and spoke with Churchill and the British government to reinforce Hong Kong. And that it kind of enabled Churchill to say, okay, then, you know, we'll send some Canadians here. And what happened was through General Grasset's involvement, these two Canadian regiments, the Winnipeg's Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles of Canada, they were under training. They were not fully trained, and the whole idea was for them to come to Hong Kong to release fully trained soldiers to go out into the field, and these two regiments would take over like garrison duties. They, you know, like the clerks, the cooks, and you know, doing all this kind of thing. But like I said, General Maltby came in about September, and along with these two regiments, they only came 4 weeks or so before the actual Japanese attack. So not everybody knew where everything was at any given time, which is very difficult, especially, I mean, I'm sure that all the Canadian troops heard about Wan Chai and what goes on there, but as soldiers, where would be the next replenishment point? Where can we go to get more armaments? Where can we go? You know, all this information and the locations for these new troops, they were, it was very difficult for them, to say the least. Now, these guys, the Canadians, like I said, were here just to release other soldiers to go and do the fighting. But it came very obvious very quickly that everyone's going to be fighting, the Canadians as well. And Hong Kong's very lucky the Canadians were here, because they put up a very good fight against the Japanese. One guy even got the Victoria Cross, Sergeant Major Osborne. But General Maltby, he had a very difficult time trying to gather his troops. He had two Canadian brigadiers as well, Wallace and Lawson, and they were out in the field, where he spent most of his time in the battle box, which is now underneath what is called Pacific Place. Well, of course, coming to nearly the end of the war, there was this huge race going on. Everybody thought the Americans were going to try and take Hong Kong, you know, because the President Roosevelt had actually stated, from what I understand, that he wanted to take Hong Kong. But when Truman took over, that was not the case. Truman understood that Britain has always managed Hong Kong. The British did quite a good job, so he was happy to let the British take it. But then there was the Taiwanese, Chiang Kai-shek's troops were trying to get to Hong Kong before the Americans, but we were very lucky. We had somebody here, the Colonial Secretary, Franklin Gimson. He was imprisoned in Stanley, and the poor guy, he arrived 2 days before the Japanese attack, just 2 days. And so consequently, he spent all his time in Hong Kong in a POW, well, you can't say prisoner of war because they were civilians, but civilian internment camp in Stanley. And so the British Army Aid Group actually passed a message to him to say the British government now allows, suggests you go out and tell everybody the British are here. We are still here, still taking Hong Kong. Franklin Gimson, he actually kept a British government going all the time he was in Stanley. One of the sad things that happened in Hong Kong was the fact that the Japanese just didn't have enough food. Hong Kong didn't have really enough food. And so what was happening, the Japanese would cordon off an area, two or three blocks, and they would take everybody out of these buildings, put them on a boat, take them out to deep water, and then set fire to it. What was happening? The Japanese couldn't feed everybody. They couldn't feed their own troops properly. I mean, it was a very bad situation. And so what happened, overall, they were driving people out of Hong Kong, and the numbers dropped from like 1.2 million down to like 500,000. And it was all because of the Japanese way of trying to get people out of Hong Kong. And it was quite funny, really, because a lot of people came down from China to escape the Japanese. And now the Japanese were here, forcing them back up to China. I say funny, it's sad.